Let's talk about Ephesus. For centuries, it was one of the most powerful, most important port cities in the entire world. Its lifeblood, its whole reason for being, was the sea. But today, if you visit its incredible ruins, you'll find them miles inland, totally surrounded by quiet farmland. So, what on earth happened? Well, this is the story of how a city wasn't brought down by an army or a plague, but by its own river. It's a huge question, right? How does this happen? Ephesus was built for the sea. It absolutely thrived on the sea. And then it looks like the sea just walked away. Or actually, the land marched out to meet the sea, leaving this legendary port completely high and dry. Let's dig into exactly how that happened.
Okay, so this map really shows you the staggering scale of what we're talking about. See that red dot? That's where the Roman-era harbor was. Now, look way over to the left. That yellow line is the coastline today. All of that green plain in between, none of that existed 2,000 years ago. It's all new land. Now, the main character in this whole geological drama is the Cayster River. For thousands of years, it was the city's best friend. It dropped off all this rich soil that made the valley super fertile. But that amazing gift, well, it was also a curse. Because along with that rich soil, the river carried a relentless, unstoppable flood of silt that would eventually choke the city to death. So there's a scientific term for this, delta progradation, but it's actually a pretty simple idea. When a river, full of dirt and sand, hits a calm body of water like a gulf, it just slows down and drops everything it's carrying. Over centuries, all that sediment builds up, layer after layer, and literally creates new land, pushing the coastline farther and farther out. And you have to understand, this wasn't some sudden catastrophe. It was a slow-motion disaster. To really get it, we need to basically watch it happen over thousands of years. And this next map, well, it's kind of like our time machine. All right, this map tells the whole 8,000-year story. Let's rewind the clock all the way back to around 6,000 BCE. You see all that blue? That was a deep sea gulf, stretching almost 20 kilometers inland. The earliest settlements were sitting right there on the water. Now, let's jump forward to the Bronze Age. You know the famous Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world? Originally, it was built right on a beach, literally at the foot of Mount Pion. But watch what happens as time goes on. Here's the coastline around 600 BC, then 400 BC, and here we are at the peak of the Roman Empire. You can see the pattern, right? It's just a slow, unstoppable march of land pushing westward. That little island in the middle, Syria? Yeah, it gets completely swallowed up by the plain. By the Byzantine era, the coast is miles away. And then finally, we get to the modern coastline we see today, leaving the grand Roman city a full 8 kilometers, that's about 5 miles, from the very sea it was built to command. And here are the hard numbers behind what we just saw on the map. In the Bronze Age, the sea is right there, at the city's doorstep. By the early Roman era, it's already pulled back 3 kilometers. Fast forward to the Byzantine period, and it's 7 kilometers away. This was an environmental change happening in real time, right before their eyes. And the pace could be just mind-boggling. At its peak, the delta was advancing up to 5 meters per year. Can you imagine that? You could stand on the docks as a kid, and by the time you're an old man, the coastline would be visibly, noticeably farther away. That was their reality. And hey, don't just take my word for it. People at the time knew exactly what was going on. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder wrote about watching this former island, Syria, get completely surrounded and absorbed by the plain, until it was just another hill. They were literally watching their geography change. Now, this wasn't some passive decline. The people of Ephesus didn't just stand around and watch their city die. No way. For centuries, they fought a desperate, incredibly expensive, and, as we now know, an ultimately hopeless war against the river and its silt. This timeline really shows a history of strategic retreat. First, the sacred harbor right next to the great temple silts up. So what do? They build a new one farther out. When that one starts to fail, they take the absolutely drastic step of moving the entire city just to get a better harbor. But the silt just keeps coming, forcing the Romans into this constant losing battle of dredging and engineering until finally they just had to give up. This is just a reconstruction, of course, but geological evidence confirms the basic idea. Think about this. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Temple of Artemis, was a seaside sanctuary. You could literally sail your boat right up to this sacred grounds. It's an incredible image that just shows you how deep the connection to the water was for this city's identity. But here's the twist. The river's natural process, that was only part of the story. The Ephesians themselves, through their own success and their own expansion, dramatically sped up the very process that was destroying them. The numbers here tell the whole story. The natural rate of silt buildup was tiny, less than 0.5 millimeter per year. But as the population boomed, they started clearing forests for timber, for fuel, for farmland. This massive deforestation led to catastrophic erosion, which increased the amount of sediment pouring into the river by 10 times, or even more. In their search for prosperity, they were basically force-feeding the monster that was eating their harbor.
And the Romans, they threw every bit of their engineering genius at this problem. They were dredging constantly, which was massively expensive. They built huge breakwaters out into the sea. At one point, the Emperor Hadrian even tried to build a dam to divert the entire river away from the harbor. But none of it worked. They were trying to fix a huge watershed-scale problem with small-scale engineering. It was simply too little too late. And if all that wasn't bad enough, the city was literally treating its own harbor like a garbage dump. Sewage, debris from construction projects, general city waste, it all got tossed right into the water, choking the very lifeline they were so desperate to keep open. So when you put it all together, you've got a natural geological process, you supercharge it with human-caused deforestation, and then you compound it with local pollution, the outcome was basically inevitable. It was a true slow-motion disaster, playing out over hundreds of years. And this is really the key takeaway. Ephesus withstood empires, it survived earthquakes, but in the end, it was defeated by its own environment. It lost its connection to the sea, and when it lost that, it lost its entire reason for being. The economy collapsed, the new swamps and marshes bred malaria, and this great world-class city just slowly faded away. And that kind of leaves us with one final big question. The story of Ephesus, it isn't just ancient history. It's a really powerful lesson about how vulnerable even the most advanced societies can be to long-term environmental change. It really forces us to ask, as our own coastlines are being threatened by rising seas and changing climates, are we actually learning the lesson that's written in the mud of Ephesus?